Hi there. You're listening to the Voice with Action podcast. I am your host, Deb Balico.
And I am Rebecca Pratt, co-founder and president of Orphan Relief and Rescue. Tune in to be awakened and inspired to take action towards what you were created to do in this world, to live fully alive.
We want to hear how our anti-trafficking program began.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the quote of St. Francis of Assisi, and it says, "Start by doing what is necessary, then do what is possible. And suddenly you are doing the impossible." And that is exactly what is happening. We are seeing the impossible being accomplished with this anti-trafficking work, and it's happening because of the body of Christ in action together. Yeah, you're going to hear just how it got started miraculously and how it continues, and hundreds of kids are being intercepted from being sold into trafficking because of this work. So I'll just go right into the story. Yeah, there's so many incredible God stories that we get to live every single day. And I want to share all of these God moments that I share regularly with our staff. It's just incredible what God is doing. And my hope is that people who listen will be inspired in their own walks with the Lord and just be excited that we do serve this extraordinary God. And He does want to use ordinary people to do extraordinary things in partnership with Him. So my hope is that people will just be encouraged in their own walks with the Lord.
Today, we're going to talk about how our anti-trafficking program began. So, Rebecca, will you take us back in time to share how that all started?
Yes. So we had an orphanage safe home in existence of 61 kids, and we had lots of people donating, little dresses for the girls and clothes for the boys. So as I was distributing these different clothes items, there was a social worker that worked in the prison, the local prison, and he would come and visit and plead the case of a child or two to come into the home. And he said, "Rebecca, when you give out clothes, don't forget that there are women in prison that they have babies." And I said, "What? There's babies in prison?" And he says, "Well, yeah, here, if a woman delivers a baby in prison, then she can keep that baby till age 5. And so there's 11 women that have babies, and, they're between newborn and 5 years old. So if you have extra clothes in those sizes, please don't forget these children that are in the prison." So on one of my trips, I had quite a few little sizes, and we only had 2 or 3 kids in the orphanage safe home that were under 5, because predominantly they're older in that home. So I was like, okay, well, we gotta take these, different clothing items to these kids in the prison. So I called up the social worker. He came and he said, "Why don't you come when we need somebody to also do maybe a service? You could share Jesus at the prison." And he's a Christian social worker. And I was like, oh, well, that'll be kind of cool. And so I had a coworker, Don Clark, who also is one of the founding people that helped us get Orphan Relief and Rescue up and running. He was on that trip. And so I said, "Don, would you want to do a message for these different ones in prison?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to." So we went to the prison, and, he shared his message, as well as, we took clothes to these women. And when we came into the area, they have the women separated from the men who have the babies. And so these women, they live in like a house that was kind of built specifically for just the women and children. And it was built by UNICEF. So we walk in, and of course, the women are just staring at us like, "What are you doing here?" And it was very awkward. So I said, "We just are here. We want to give some clothes to your children, as well as if any of you want to tell us your story or want us to pray for you, you can just come and share with us. And we'll just be sitting here on this bench, and, you can come to us and tell us your story if you want." Now, in this area, they do not talk about their personal life. Like, it's very difficult to get the locals to share anything about their personal, especially dark secrets. And so I did not think anybody would come forward to share their story. So as we're sitting there, all of a sudden, every single one of them lined up. And it was like, oh my gosh, they want to talk. And so the first woman comes forward and she says, I'm in prison because somebody thought that I cursed one of my older children. And so he is mentally ill. And the villagers brought me to court and said that I'm the one that cursed my son to be this way. And so the judge said that he believed them. And so he put me in prison. And my best friend, they said, was in on it, and my mother-in-law was in on it. And so we all are in prison here. And my best friend and I, we've delivered our babies here, and that's why we have our babies. And I said, how many children do you have at home? And they each said they had 4 children at home. And I said, who's taking care of them? And are your husbands taking care of them? And they said, no, our husbands have to work, and they work outside of the country. And so our kids are just left. We don't know what's happening to them. So they had been in there for 8 months. And then at the end of their talk, they said, but the judge said that we're innocent and that he was going to let us go, but he hasn't yet. And so I was like, well, do you have paperwork that shares that? And she said, yes. And I said, can you bring that to me? So she brought me her paperwork. So one after the next, one woman after the next shared. And there was 4 women out of the 11 that had been proved innocent by the judge. And they had paperwork to prove that they were innocent, but they were still in prison for these 2 women particularly had been for 8 months. They had been in prison, and the first month had been deemed innocent. So I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. So I looked at the social worker. I said, what would it take to go before that judge and ask him to tell us about these cases? Like, why are they still in prison and they're innocent? And he says, yeah, we could do that Monday, tomorrow. And so the next day, went into the judge's office, and I asked the judge, I said, we just visited your prison, and this is what these women told us, and I have their paperwork. And so he says, well, can I see the paperwork? So I handed it to him, and he says, yep, that was me. Yep, I totally know those cases. And I said, can you tell me why they haven't been released yet? And he says, well, I just have a lot of paperwork, and I'm in between secretaries, but as soon as I get my new secretary, I should get a new secretary this week, I will release them. And I said, okay, so like this week you'll release them? And he says, yes, as soon as I get my new secretary. And he said, is there anything else that you need? Because, we're friends now. And I said, no, this is it. And so he says, okay, well, whatever you need, you just come here and we'll talk about it. Now, something that had happened right before I walked in, I was pretty upset, with this judge for keeping these women. And I was going to go in with an opposite spirit of godliness. And the Lord really prompted my heart to really honor this judge, thank him for what he's doing for his country, let him know what you do to protect children, and really go in honoring him. And so when I went into his office, that was the first thing I did. I said, my name is Rebecca Pratt. I'm the president of Orphan Relief and Rescue. And I just want to say that you and I do similar work. We're both working for justice. And I want to thank you for what you're doing for your people. So I came in with that. And then when I presented the cases to him, he literally was like, absolutely, I will set these women free. So he asked me to come back to visit him every time I'm in the country. And so I did. And so for the first 2 years of my visits back, I would go to his office and he would, tell me stories. I'd say, tell me stories. And he'd say, oh, today I just went to the border of Nigeria and rescued 18 kids from being trafficked. And I was like, what? 18 kids? I said, well, where did you take them? And he said, I had to take them right back to their village where their parents, who can't feed them, are the ones that have sold them. And he said, so it's terrible. But he says, can you do me a favor? And I was like, what? What's the favor? And he said, could you build more of those orphanage safe homes that you have? Because I've seen the home and it's very nice and we need more of those so I could bring all these children to you. And I said, well, how many children are you, rescuing? And he says, well, yesterday I rescued 12 and the day before that, and he starts naming off all these numbers. And I was like, oh my gosh, we can't build enough homes for the amount of kids that you're rescuing. And so each visit, he would ask me again, will you please build one of these orphanage safe homes? Please, please, please. And I just would say the same thing. We can't build enough to facilitate how many you rescue. So on one of these visits, he said, okay, Rebecca, I'm understanding you're not going to build another home, but will you just get your people into these villages? Because I'm tired of going to the border as much as I am. And just get your people into these villages and see what you could do to curve this. And as he was talking, it's in between translation. So as the translation was happening, I felt like God just spoke to me. You have your anti-trafficking team. I was working with translators that are pastors, and I had 3 of them working with me at the time. We were translating the sponsorship letters, to French and back to English. And so I literally felt like God spoke to my heart. You have your anti-trafficking team here. And so after that meeting, I went back to my place and I got the team together and I said, what would you all think about going into the villages where trafficking is really high and see what you could do to curb trafficking? Would you be interested in that? And they all said, well, yes, of course. This is our dream. Like, we want to get into those villages. We've always wanted to get into those villages, but you can't just walk in those villages. You're not welcome. And you have to have legal permission to go into those villages. It's a very closed area. And I was like, okay. And so I went back to the judge. We had dinner soon after that. And as we're talking, he again was saying, are you going to get your people in there? Are you going to literally try to help curve this, for me? And I said, okay. I said, I had a napkin and I grabbed a pen out of my purse and I pushed the napkin towards him and I said, okay, write down the top 5 villages where you are rescuing 12 to 18 kids in a day. So he wrote down the top 5 villages, and we're just basically in the first area still with where we've gone. But we went in there, and it's an area where it's the voodoo capital of the world. Witchcraft is, 95% of them practice witchcraft. Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink.
Here, while you're getting a drink, a few stats that I could share about the area that we gathered is approximately 20% of the children in these regions are trafficked, and that most children are trafficked between the age of 7 and 12, but we have seen as young as 5 years old. And so the women on average have over 5 children, and the greater the increase of the number of children, the more likely they are to traffic. So if they have as many as 5 or like 8 children, there's a 100% chance that they will traffic them because it's too many mouths to feed. So the women on average, that 53% of the women, they have at least trafficked 1 child. And there is a definite correlation with the number of children and per women, the likelihood of the trafficking of 1 child increases the number of kids that we have. So those are statistics that we pulled and we learned from this community. And so those are the numbers that we have been able to curb since then. But
yeah, so this judge, he said, okay, if you're going to send a team in there, he said, you'll need official documents to have them carry that has my signature on it, has the mayor's signature and the chief of the village signature. And he said, it'll have to be renewed every 6 months. And we'll call it basically that they're there to curb poverty and they're doing research on poverty. And so it'll be official business from the officials, which is me and, the mayor and the chief. And he said, if your people do not carry these documents, he said, then they will be escorted out by the police. They will not be welcome there, or they could be harmed by the locals. He said, because this is not an area where they embrace outsiders, basically. He was saying it in a nice way. And he said, these people aren't bad people. They just can't feed their children and they're in poverty. And this is a way of life for them to survive. And he said, so I just want you to remember they're not bad people. So I talked with our staff and I told them all, I said, okay, here's your documentation. This is every 6 months you have to have this renewed and this is what you show people. But you're just going to go from house to house and you're just going to, for 6 months, you're just going to do research and find out who the traffickers are, why the families are trafficking, where they're trafficking, when do they traffic, how much are they getting for each child. everything there is to know about this. I said, I want you to do research for 6 months. And I said, I don't want you to tell anybody that you're pastors, or I don't want you to tell them that you're a Christian. I don't want you to pray with anybody out loud. Now, when you leave, you can definitely pray under your breath for them, but I don't want you physically saying, let me pray for you. And you cannot bring a Bible for 6 months, because if you do, your life will be in danger, because they don't want their voodoo and witchcraft messed with and their way of life hindered. And so they literally looked at me and they said, "Ooh, we've never done that before." And I said, "You're on a secret mission. This is a secret mission, you know." And they said, "Okay, okay. Well, we've never done that, but we will do that." And so I said, after that 6 months, I said, they will be so curious with the real reason you're there, because ultimately we want Jesus there and we want people to come to Jesus, but they can't know that. And so I said, they will be begging you for Jesus after 6 months. You watch. So sure enough, after the first 6 months, they called me and they said, okay, we know the next 40 kids that are going to be sold. They are sold around school time. So in September is one of the biggest trafficking times, and January is the next. And if parents can't buy a uniform or school supplies for the child who has to go to school and they can't feed them, then they're going to traffic them. So we know the next 40 kids that are going to be sold. And I said, okay, well, how can we save them? And they said, if you provide a school uniform and school supplies, and some of them need tuition, the elementary kids were free, but the older kids, you had to pay some tuition. And they said, then we feel like we can save them. And I said, okay. So they did that and got 40 kids in. Then I come a couple weeks later to document all of this. And when I came in, all these mothers were there so it was 2 areas, and they had meetings set up for me to meet all of these parents. And so one meeting, had 40 women. Another meeting, there was a bunch of women. My team wanted me to tell them why they shouldn't traffic children. And so as I'm asking them if I could share a little something, they of course said, yes, we want to hear from you. And so I'm telling them, what trafficking is and what happens to their kids when they traffic them, that they're actually being treated as slaves, and that we're here to help them curb this trafficking. And we want to help them in their life. One lady stood up and she said, Rebecca, I have 18 children. She said, my husband had 5 wives and 4 of them have died. And I've inherited all of their children. And she says, I've already trafficked 6 of the children, and I'm going to have to traffic 5 more because I can't feed them all. I literally was like, I have no idea what that even feels like. And I said, I am so sorry that you are in such hardship, and I don't understand. But I want you to know that the God who created us and created you and your children loves you so much and has a plan for you. I want you to know that all of our team, they know Jesus and they want to help you. And the God who created your children wants to help them, and so has an answer for them. So if you want to come forward after this meeting and come and talk to our anti-trafficking team up here, they will put the names down and we'll put those children on our program as well. And they'll get fed 2 meals a day. And as I left that meeting, I realized that we can't just help the children. We have to do something as well to help the parents who literally can't feed their kids. And their only means of survival is to sell their kids. And so that's where we came into the savings and loan program, helping them to be able to start businesses so that they can provide for their own. And that's really how the anti-trafficking work really began in a big way. And today we've literally intercepted hundreds and hundreds of kids. We have 575 kids right now on our school and feeding program that have been directly intercepted from being sold or who have come back from slavery. We have thousands of parents who have come through the savings and loan program, and God is sweeping through, and many of these families now have come to Jesus, renouncing their voodoo and witchcraft, which has kept them in slavery and bondage in numerous ways, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And God is just sweeping through and just beautiful, beautiful redemption stories all around.
Yeah. So the program consists of that we learned from these mothers and from this community is that if the kids could be enrolled in school, fed 2 meals a day, and then we invite the parents to be a part of our savings and loan program, they sign a contract and they say they will not traffic their children. And then we have monitors that continue to observe and watch these kids. And on the weekends, we have even a community feeding program where anyone in the community can come. And our monitors, that's where they can check on the health and well-being of these kids. They can see if there's any other kids that are at risk of being trafficked. And then they can also take those kids to official meetings that they might need with the social welfare department, with the doctor's office. Our anti-trafficking team wears many, many hats, has many jobs, but it's amazing that because there is no banking system in the region where we work, this savings and loans program has become their banking system, and the community has bonded together. And if they hear that someone in their community is going to traffic a child, they will go to them and they will say, "Hey, you have another choice. You do not have to traffic your children. There is another option. Come learn from Orphan Relief and Rescue that you can raise your children, feed your children, and use this savings and loan program to start a business." And these businesses have flourished, have thrived. And so I'm excited for future podcasts to be able to share with you all some of these amazing, amazing stories of how this microfinance savings and loan program has multiplied, how the community is on their own initiative is growing this anti-trafficking program. So make sure you tuned in for future stories. But to close us out today, Rebecca, would you like to share your favorite verse of Ephesians 3:20, which really does summarize kind of this anti-trafficking program and how amazing God is?
Yeah, Ephesians 3:20 just says God will do above and beyond what we can ask or imagine, and that is what we are seeing in this work. We are seeing God do what we could have never dreamed up. And that's what he wants to do in each of our lives, no matter what sphere we're in, the God we serve is going to do above and beyond what we could ask or imagine because it's the God that we serve. And as we work in partnership with him every single day, just saying the yeses to the Lord, that's when he will do the miraculous through our life.
We serve a very miraculous God. So tune in next week for more amazing stories. Thank you for listening to the Voice with Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, would you consider sharing or subscribing to this podcast and leave a 5-star review to help us grow? If you want to reach us or help us end child trafficking in West Africa, go to orphanreliefandrescue.org. That's orphanreliefandrescue.org. See you next week.